Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of the Publisher Lab. Joined alongside me today is no one. Unfortunately, not good, off to a good start. That's why I have my good friend Shelby King often here helping me out. Today, she's actually undergoing some technical issues, specifically that relates to her internet connection, which is another fun byproduct of the global pandemic and everyone working remotely. So in this current time, I thought it gave me a really unique opportunity to do an episode that I think is very timely given the current circumstances. So I'm going to walk everyone through today, not only how to do something that I think is both actionable and can help digital publishers maybe get some more traffic at this current time, but also I'm going to do a regular episode of the Publisher Lab too. So even if you're like, Tyler, I hate that, don't worry. I'm going to give you the regular episode along with something that along with this video portion, I think is going to be helpful, hopefully, to a lot of publishers. So today I'm going to start with basically in this current crisis, how to repurpose content. So I've written about this before on different blogs back in the day, and I know we've got some writers now that write for the Ezoic blog that write really great content. But in this case today, I'm going to highlight something that I think can really benefit publishers that are interested in repurposing content on their website. So I'm going to start by just going ahead and sharing my screen because this is a grand example of exactly how I'm going to do this today. So I am sharing my screen and I'm showing you Zoom. So right now I'm using Zoom to record both the audio and video portion of this podcast. So what's nice is Zoom gives you the ability to, if you go in, you can actually host the recordings both in the cloud and locally, but you can also ask it to split out the audio file only along with the video. So as soon as this is done, I'm actually going to go into my folders and I'll have both an audio file and a video file. So I can edit anything together that I want to use for the video alongside anything that I would want to use in terms of audio that I can then upload. So you may say, well, Tyler, I only do video or I do audio or I do neither. Well, let's start by going back and looking at older content that maybe has performed well. So many of you may have heard me talk about this before. We may have referenced it on the podcast previously, but in my case today, I'm going to show you one of my sites and how I go about looking at some of the older content. So this is a pretty small site, but I'm going to just use SEMrush. So what's nice here is with SEMrush, you can get a free edition for at least a small period of time. There's also a Hrefs and a few others that are out there that you can do the same sort of thing with. So first, I'm just going to look at all my organic keywords here. Now, note that some of these tools are not perfect. You could also use something like Search Console to look at this. I'm actually a big fan of looking at Search Console, but for the case of this, I'm just going to use this because it allows me to use multiple filters and Search Console only gives you one. So I want to look at content that maybe ranks from, let's say, 6 to 11. Just a fun range right now. And I want to look at search volume that goes from, let's say, 50 visits to at least, I don't know, let's make it a lot. So then I click apply. And I'm going to look at what queries my website is ranking for in these kind of like position 6 to 11 in search engines range. And this is going to basically give me opportunities for, hey, I have some content that's out there. It's ranking for these terms, but it may not be ranking quite as highly as it should be to actually get some traffic. So a good one right here is Tom Brady electrolyte supplements. I can go and look and see that there's an article here that I wrote about electrolyte supplements. And I think I referenced in here, yeah, NFL quarterback Tom Brady recently brought fame to electrolyte supplements as he claims to take them throughout the day to help him stay limber and pliable. So that's a piece of my article here, yet other than just referencing Tom Brady in a sentence, I don't really use it as a feature point of the article. So given that this is a high volume search term, I can go back in and then edit this article and then maybe add an H2 here at the top of the page, split this section out and say, does Tom Brady use electrolytes, ? Or something along those lines. It really speaks to the fact that one of the queries that has a decent amount of traffic that I currently rank, it looks like number 9 for, is Tom Brady electrolyte supplements. So I asked myself the question, and maybe I'll even search Tom Brady electrolyte supplements. So I look at the other top results maybe to figure out what exactly is it that Google thinks people are looking for when they're searching this. So I see Tom Brady sells his own electrolyte supplements, so maybe that's what people are looking for. It seems like those rank quite high. However, the rich snippet is actually going to 538 Sports. So they're actually just referencing that these are the electrolytes that he uses. So from my site, and based on what I'm seeing in the third results, the fifth results here, it seems like a decent amount of what Google thinks people might be looking for is people trying to figure out what electrolyte supplements he uses and if he uses them at all. So I think I can probably do a pretty good job. I can say he's got his own. I can maybe look into those and research exactly what trace minerals. So I'm looking at electrolytes here. So that's what his drink includes. I can maybe name all of those sports minerals. So that would make me a little bit more of an authority on this topic than I am today. And I can see inside of the SERP features, which is the search engine results page, that there's quite a bit of things that go into this. So there's maybe some images and a lot of other things I can use to augment this content. Now remember, I said repurposing. So what I could do, if this is something that I think is doing well, or just the article in general is something that I think is performing really well, I can maybe take a blog that is doing well or one that I'm augmenting. And I can say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to shoot a short video that explains how Tom Brady is using electrolyte supplements in his training. I can walk through, I can identify the research. I can maybe show some Tom Brady electrolyte supplements. They seem fairly inexpensive. I could probably buy some on Amazon. And I could then highlight the Tom Brady electrolyte supplements. And guess what? It looks like he sells them on Amazon, or at least there's some other ones available on Amazon. If you're an Amazon Associates member, maybe it's an opportunity to then make a little bit of affiliate revenue by then sending people to your article, and hopefully they'll click on it and maybe buy some electrolytes off of Amazon and make you a couple bucks. Actually, I think that's what I'm doing on my site right now. And so being able to repurpose that in that way could be really helpful. You could also, especially if you have lots of content that maybe lends itself to something fairly interesting on a topic. So Injury Health Blog there's a lot of knee injury content, primarily because when I started it, I wrote around 12 articles about various knee injuries that I've had. So when I go back and I look at the things that it ranks highly for, it's a lot of knee injury related material. And whenever you look at that up close, I learned pretty quickly that the knee stuff that I've got on here, a lot of it's fairly similar. I could probably do short little audio podcasts about knee injuries, or short little audio podcasts about injuries in general, where I basically just take the information from these articles, which is fairly in depth. So my guess is there's not a short podcast available right now on stem cell therapy testimonials for knee, ankle, and shoulder injuries. My wife's had this, I've had this. So I could probably speak to this to a fair degree of, I guess, interest. I could do a podcast on it. I could shoot the video similar to this where I describe it and maybe walk people through it. And then you can make that video available on YouTube or other platforms. And then you can use a tool like Anchor if you've never started a podcast before, or just simply want to get it out into different places. Anchor allows you to basically set up a free podcast, host the audio, and it will automatically deliver it to platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere a podcast goes. You can basically just take the audio from your Zoom, which you're going to then turn around and use that video to maybe upload the video and host it on your site, maybe insert it into the articles that you have already, make them better, augment that content, and then also create yourself a audio podcast here. So I actually have a jiu-jitsu podcast that my wife and I started here recently. So for those Publisher Lab listeners that have a major overlap with the jiu-jitsu audience, congratulations. You can listen to me now talk about jiu-jitsu too. I'm guessing there's If there's one, I'm surprised. But that being said, you can see here, this is the podcast we just started. There's episodes on here, and it's delivered to multiple different outlets. And you can set episodes to where they are published later on, and all kinds of different things. But this allows you to basically take your content, whether existing or maybe something that you're trying to augment so that you can get more search traffic, and then repurpose it quickly into other formats where you can use the blog as a script for a video or a podcast, or you can use a podcast or a video that you have maybe to create a blog. And so this is something that you can do specifically. But the other thing that you could look at doing is you could say, well, I have a website on injuries. What is out there right now that does not have any type of video or audio content? So Tom Brady electrolyte supplements, as I go through here, I don't see any video ranking on the first page of Google. Let's look at something like YouTube. So what I want to look at YouTube for is I basically just want to see, this seems to be something people have an interest in. Has anyone created any video regarding it yet? And since I've written about it before, it might make sense specifically for me to do video about it. So I can see here, it looks like his company is the only one that is done any video on the electrolyte supplements, and then everything else is pretty much just Tom Brady workout related. So I could probably shoot a pretty nice little short video on this, and it could augment my article, or I could go out and find somebody else's content that they created. And if there's no audio podcast and there's no video, I don't want to borrow their content verbatim, but I can use their information and say, hey, I was recently researching Tom Brady electrolyte supplements and was able to find on 538.com that he actually makes his own. And they included these trace minerals, and on whatever.com, it says it includes these ones and blah, blah, blah. And this is what Tom has said before. You can just borrow some easy kind of pre-built content that's out there ranking highly and then repurpose it into these other formats. You can take that information that's a commodity and then repurpose it into these other formats. Now, you might be asking, Tyler, what's the best way to approach reformatting or repurposing this content, especially once it's done? Is it just going to show up someplace? It'd be nice if you could share it somewhere. So chances are, especially if you're augmenting older content, you may have the ability to reshare it now, and it may be more relevant. Your audiences may have grown in different places because of the new format that may give you a chance to go someplace new with it. But when you're writing new content, I want to recommend our writing guide. So the Zoic writing guide here is something that I created a while back, and it's for basically targeting search queries effectively. So different titles, headlines. We talk about how to use H2s, how to go after rich snippets without using any schema markup. So this kind of structure is really, really helpful, I think, in being able to reformat content and then also basically target some of those queries that we identified in SEMrush at the beginning. That all being said, when you share new content, it's really nice sometimes if you can maybe condense things down into something like a guide that's downloadable or something like that. And then you can basically push people back to your content by saying, we've made something new for this content you can now download. So if you want this Ezoic writing guide, right now you can just Google Ezoic writing guide, and I believe you can see the article that it's embedded in is the first result, and the second result is actually the PDF itself. But if you give me enough time, we may create a new blog article that includes all of this information, and we will basically be taking this podcast, the video version of this, and making it an instructional YouTube video, and then also turning this all into a blog as well. So I've taken one basically half-hour piece of my time and turned it into basically the core piece of 3 different pieces of content. And that's something that I think allows a lot of publishers right now that are remote to be able to work faster. Also, it gives you a really nice strategy to go back and really look at the things that are working, especially if you're in a situation where maybe different parts of your business are disrupted because of cash flow, whether it's writers or something along those lines, or even just access to your normal office or something like that. So that is the first part of this podcast, and hopefully it's been helpful. And now I'm going to do our more traditional podcast and start looking at the news. And you'll have to excuse me. I had to take a drink there. And so Shelby, before we were unable to connect because of the internet connection, was able to get with me on some of the news that she had identified this week. And it aligns really well with some of the topics that I already had in mind. So Instagram sees the greatest gains from recent social media use related to the pandemic. So the Search Engine Journal says that according to new projections that they've actually collected from eMarketer, that social media and internet usage as a whole is on the rise. So time spent with Instagram has been relatively flat and was only projected to grow between about 1.5% in 2020. So now Instagram is expected to see the largest growth out of all the social networks that were covered in this eMarketer study, with an estimated 14% boost in the time on platform. So that's pretty interesting, just given the fact that you have all these people at home now and you have internet usage surging. You kind of look at what formats are growing. Snapchat also had their stock explode this week, partially because of the massive user growth. Now, the real question about Snap is, will that user growth maintain as people basically start getting back outside of their homes and things along those lines? Are people basically just running out of content on other platforms and kind of jumping into these other places where they've heard about it? I'm a bit skeptical about whether or not the gains that are made in terms of user growth right now are real or not. And that is a real question that you're seeing a lot of people ask, and you're seeing kind of reflected in financial markets as well. Facebook is one exception to this rule, and that kind of extends to Instagram a little bit as well. So eMarketer kind of highlighted them in this piece as well. But the big thing that I think sticks out to me about Facebook is they kind of took a spray and pray approach to product development recently, where they unrolled both video chat messaging, like a Zoom competitor, along with gaming apps and a whole bunch of other things to try to compete with a lot of the other tech that's out there and a lot of the other platforms. And most of these things were things that Facebook had originally intended to release later this year. If there's one thing Facebook is known for, outside of not being great with security and privacy, it's that their product dev is very fast. The Facebook philosophy of move fast and break things, I really like their stance here, where they're going to just basically take lots of new ideas and products and then just throw them out there. Realistically, for Facebook, it's a win if any of them stick. And so if you're a publisher right now and you're looking at Facebook's chats, you're looking at the things that they're doing in gaming, there's a lot of different things that they've started with. I think they've released like 6 new just different apps and products last week. It's worth checking them out and see if there isn't an audience there or a way to engage your audience. Because if one of these emerges, you could be one of the first ones there. And that's always the thing that people talk about with social media platforms and technologies, is if you're one of the first ones there, you have this head start on being able to take advantage of it. So the next story comes from Adweek, and it's that Redditors want Redditors and community to start chatting. So this is something personally, as a Reddit user, I've noticed, and I'm a beta user for a lot of the Reddit app stuff, and just a beta user for Reddit in general. And so we've been getting the kind of chat features for a minute, and universally, all the other beta users that are included in the R beta subreddit do not like the chat feature, and I would be included in that. I don't really want Reddit as a chat feature. However, the Adweek article says that Reddit is claiming that the new feature is a response to the 80% spike in chat usage on its platform since the pandemic began, ramping up in late January. The goal is to connect like-minded users who are also seeking deeper engagement on subjects relevant to the community that they're browsing. If the feature has been activated, and a community users can use the start chatting button, and they will be directed to a randomly generated community themed chat room. So there are a couple that I think I can think of specifically that I'm in where I've looked at the chats before, and it's usually a small handful of users. But it is an interesting way that engagement has been approached. And if you're a publisher, it may be a great place to go and get some story ideas and maybe even crowdsource some information inside of those chats. I know one publisher in particular that's more in the kind of like how to troubleshooting niche. And what they will do is they will go into Reddit and other forums, and in chats, they'll basically ask people a lot of questions, and they'll actually get information and answers that they can then use and develop so that they can write great content about it. This next article comes from Media Post, and it says the Wall Street Journal launches personal finance site. So the Wall Street Journal has launched a mobile-first site called WSJ Money to help readers manage their finances during the COVID-19 crisis. So the interactive microsite is divided into five topics. Shelby does this all the time, gets a little bit tongue-tied. So now I can relate a little bit. So it says the interactive microsite is divided into 5 topics: stimulus money, student loans, mortgages, unemployment, and taxes. So the content is presented in a Q&A format with questions such as, what if I can make my mortgage payment this month? How much will my unemployment check be? So it's basically related to this very current environment, which is super smart, because if you actually look at something, well, coronavirus searches are off the charts right now, but whenever you go in and you look at searches, you can see that coronavirus, one of the top associated searches with it is stimulus money, unemployment, things like this, things that are affecting all individuals right now. And so I think when you have something that's this prevalent or this broad to an audience that you already are able to connect with, then it makes a lot of sense to maybe even launch, I don't know if a microsite makes sense, but to have an entire, I guess, dedication. So, if you're a smaller publisher, you might think about this as like a menu item, specific to it. You may think about spinning up a YouTube channel, podcast. There's a lot of different things that you could potentially do, but to be able to say, we're going to basically take one section of content and brand it a certain way. This could be a really great way for your audience to basically come to you as an expert or authority on one particular topic, like the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the last topics I'll talk a little bit more about today is Google. So Google just had their Q1 earnings report last week. And in the report, Google identified specifically that ad revenue obviously grossly affected, something we've talked about on the show and something you can read more about on the Ezoic blog, where we update each week. For a while, we were updating it daily on the COVID-19 impacts on digital ad rates and publishers. So Google identified that they were seeing big drops in ad revenue, but that they were seeing encouraging behavior so far in April that made them think that advertisers would be returning to the market here fairly soon. You can also see financial markets starting to recover, as financial markets, we've talked before about how they can be kind of difficult to read, but they generally will give us a fairly decent finger on the pulse of whether or not these things are going to affect ad rates or not. And really, when we saw them dip the hardest was when the market sort of crashed on March 22nd here in the US. And then we started to see things start to get better as Q2 has started. And that's sort of what the market looks like right now as well. And so that is fairly encouraging and something that Google has shared as well. Now, the thing that publishers probably need to be slightly concerned about in this entire situation is that we're talking about a lot of parties that are benefiting. We're talking about Facebook. We're talking about Google. We think about Amazon. Above, we were talking about Snapchat. We were talking about Instagram. These are all major platforms. And right now, because of their use, you have lots and lots of users, and the audience there is attracted to content. But it runs a risk. Building audiences on those platforms can be dangerous. And also, these entities are getting stronger as a result of all of this. And so as a publisher, one of the things that I think is key right now, especially if you're benefiting from a traffic standpoint, from being able to attract more visitors to your content, you need to be thinking about, how do I maintain these visitors long-term? Let's pretend tomorrow there's a massive vaccine that's available and everyone in the world is able to access it and go back to work tomorrow. What happens to those people that are reading your content? Do you still have connection to them? Do they still come and connect with you on these platforms? Do they connect with you on your website? Probably not in a lot of cases. And that is the thing as a publisher. I would think through. So I think a lot of the things we talked about today about having specific content, being able to repurpose content and break out into other formats and things like that. When we talked about the beginning, see how good I am at this. I'm tying it all back to the beginning. It seems disjointed, but I promise you, these things are somewhat put together, or at least, I don't know, maybe I make it sound good. Maybe I should be a politician. Probably not. But either way, this is a great way for publishers to be thinking about how do they connect with their audience, both whether it's to repurpose content and capture their audience in other places, or how do they keep them long term? Because realistically, we're in a very tumultuous period of time, and being able to actually hone in on our audience and say, I'm here and I've created great content. Hopefully we can still be friends long term, I think is a really great way of being able to grow your business while at the same time building a real brand, something that's different and not a commodity in terms of the information that your audience gets. And that's it. This is an episode of the Publisher Lab. I know it's different. There's a lot of things that are different right now. We're all kind of getting used to that, but it's weird talking to yourself for a long period of time. I used to do broadcasts for jiu-jitsu, and the worst ones were whenever they would basically have me do a television broadcast with no counterpart, where I would just be calling the action all by myself for 8 hours at a time. It was terrible. So for those of you that are in isolation right now and don't have someone to talk to, I relate and I feel for you. And until then, be safe, be healthy, and we'll catch you next time on another episode of The Publisher Lab.